Welcome, first of all, to the very first video ever for Evangelicals in Exile. I am coming to you from my home in Kansas City, home of the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs. I want to talk today for a moment about Leviticus. And before I say anything that might make you feel like I really have a handle on Leviticus, I want to share that I've learned a ton through Rob Bell's Blood, Guts, and Fire, his audio commentary on Leviticus. So if you're interested in learning about Leviticus specifically, but more about the Bible in general, I think he's an incredible teacher and did a wonderful treatment on Leviticus. I've actually listened to the first 2 of 3 parts and am going to be digging into the third soon. But I wanted to talk about this because I've been reading through Leviticus, and something he said really came to mind, which is Leviticus can be confusing for people who haven't been trained or haven't learned Leviticus, haven't had somebody sit down and teach them what it is. And so I felt like it's appropriate to kind of begin this video by grounding ourselves in what is Leviticus. If you think about the Torah, you have Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus. Exodus is really the beginning. This is the story of the Hebrews, of who these people are and who the God of these Hebrews is. So Genesis is kind of the prelude or the intro to that story. Then Leviticus is really kind of the second piece, which is you have this origin story, which explains how did we get here. You've got Exodus, which is this is the story of the Hebrews. And then you have Leviticus, and you find the Hebrews. They've been rescued from slavery and oppression in Egypt, and now they are wandering around. And in order to figure out how they make their way in the wilderness specifically, but in this new world, they have to create a new order. So this is essentially a new world order that they're creating. This is a book for the priests to understand how to guide and instruct these people as they create this new identity, no longer a slave, but now free. What does that mean? How do we organize ourselves? How do we organize our lives? Around what do we organize? You see this beautiful imagery in Leviticus where they encamp around the tabernacle. So God is at the center, at the heart of this community. And so Leviticus goes over painstakingly, in painstaking detail, because again, this would have been an oral tradition passed down, so tons of repetition for how we go about things. But something I thought was really interesting in chapters 25 and in 26, you read about the Sabbath, and then you read about the nation's obedience to God. And I think about in the Sabbath, so again, we're talking about this new ordering of ourselves, and the Sabbath is establishing and it's mandating a rhythm of rest. So your identity used to be found in what you could produce, how many bricks you could produce, were you meeting your quota? Your identity was your productivity. Surely us Americans can't learn anything about that, right? I love that this ancient book kind of reveals to us even our current modern tendencies or the lies that we tell ourselves or the pressure that we put on ourselves. So the Sabbath establishes this new rhythm, and then you learn about this concept of the Jubilee, where the wealth gap is moderated by this cycle of returning land. So even if I had to sell a piece of property to make ends meet, I know that a time will come where that is given back to my family. So nobody preys on those who need help, and in fact, the system is built around ensuring that does not happen, that the rich don't get richer and the poor get poorer. But then we come into chapter 26, which is actually like a really violent, as most of this book is, a violent chapter. And there's this scripture in verse 6. It says, I will grant you peace in the land. This is the God speaking to the people. I will grant you peace in the land, and you will lie down, and no one will make you afraid. I will remove wild beasts from the land, and the sword will not pass through your country. So this concept of I, God, am going to give you peace. And again, this word in the Hebrew is shalom. I'm going to give you peace in this land. And then it addresses some very practical threats to this people, which is wild beasts and the sword. They, are in the wilderness. They are threatened by animals, but they're also threatened by opposing armies. They're going through land that's occupied. And so, of course, neighboring armies and tribal conflict is going to become an issue. But this God says, after all of this, so we've worked our way through almost the entirety of Leviticus, and he says, I will give you peace in the land. And I was struck by that because it's sandwiched in a lot of violence. And so sometimes I think we have this propensity to read the Bible, specifically the Old Testament, with this lens of, well, this is violent and it's antiquated, therefore I am not able to learn from it. But as we just saw in the establishment of the Sabbath, this book is reading us to a certain extent. Sure, this was written thousands of years ago in an ancient society that this whole tribe, this whole nation was enslaved. Yet the anxieties that they have, the way that they need to reorder themselves in this new way of being is so pertinent and so timely even for us. Living in hustle culture where everybody's got to hustle and everybody's got to be doing more, and we kind of measure ourselves based off of the frenzy of our calendar. We start to believe the lie that we are what we produce. We are what we put out. We are what we accomplish. And this reminds us that no, you're not. There is something new going on. God has something different for you. Sure, that might have been your past. It might have been what you came out of, but God is calling you into something deeper and more beautiful, and it requires rest. So I love that. It's again, we have this tendency to say like, well, it's either all or nothing. Like I either need to, like follow the Levitical law or it doesn't apply to me. And I think there's a third way of reading this and interacting with the text where we start to ask our questions. First of all, what is this text revealing about God that would have been wildly progressive to these ancient societies? Like a God who wants to sow peace, who gives people peace in the land. You ask the Mesopotamian neighbors of the day, and peaceful probably not would have been how they describe their gods. And resting and rejuvenation and participating in new creation. These were new ideas, and they are still new ideas that we can learn from. So don't throw the baby out with the bathwater, I guess is what I'm saying here. This text is rich, and there's so much to learn, and it's timely for us even now, because you and I tend to have the same kind of anxieties. What does God think of me? Is God pleased? Is God good? Is he for me? Will he provide? Will I experience peace in this life? These are just as much modern questions as they were ancient questions. So this little nugget in the middle of a bunch of old violent text reminds us this God is the one that brings about peace. So may I experience peace in my life, and may you experience peace in yours. Thank you, Leviticus, for the reminder.